Laura Warren hit the ground the moment she saw her. The face was older. The body was thinner. But those eyes, those were the same eyes she kissed goodnight 17 years ago. Alicia didn't speak. She just lifted her wrist slowly, revealing faint, circular scars, the kind left behind by restraints no parent should ever have to see on their child. After 17 years of silence, dead ends, and grief that never quite settled, Alicia Warren had walked back into her parents' arms. But here's what no one expected: the story of how she came home is just as haunting as the story of how she disappeared. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from today? I see you, Florida. I see you, Texas. I know my New Yorkers are in here. Let me know your city or state. I genuinely love seeing where this community is growing. And listen, if you believe Alicia's story deserves to be told, if you believe cases like hers should never be forgotten, then you already know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. We're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you watching right now can help make that happen. This channel exists because of people like you, people who refuse to let these stories fade into silence. So ask yourself, are you on the side of the ones who gave up, or the ones who kept searching? If you're a searcher, subscribe. Stick with me. Let's keep going. Now, to understand how a missing teenager walked back into her parents' lives after nearly 2 decades, we have to rewind. Far from Florida, to a quiet government office in North Carolina where everything changed in an instant. A small Social Security branch sat just off a 2-lane road outside Asheville. It was the kind of forgettable building people visited to fix paperwork and walked out of without a second thought. On a warm April afternoon, the door creaked open and a young woman stepped inside. She kept her head low. Her sleeves were pulled over her hands. She slid a worn Social Security card across the counter without making eye contact. The name on the card read, Alicia Carter. The clerk typed in the number. The system froze, then flashed a red alert she had never seen in her career. Match found, active missing person record. The match traced back to a Florida database, one that hadn't been touched in years. The file was 17 years old. And the name on the original record was different. Alicia Warren. Missing from Clearwater, Florida. Age at disappearance, 17. Last seen leaving her part-time job at a local ice cream shop. The clerk looked at the photo on file, a teenager with a bright smile, hair pulled into a messy bun, bracelets stacked up her arm. Then she looked at the woman standing in front of her. The shape of her face. The tension in her posture. The haunted look in her eyes. It all matched. Have you ever lived in Florida? The clerk asked slowly. A long pause. Maybe, the woman whispered. I'm not sure. That answer made the clerk's stomach drop. She flagged the record, called her supervisor, and within the hour, law enforcement was on the phone. The case file that had gathered dust for 17 years suddenly lit up again. DNA was collected that same afternoon. No delays. No lost samples. No bureaucratic runaround. And it didn't take long. The woman standing in that office was not Alicia Carter. She was Alicia Warren, the girl Florida had searched for almost 2 decades ago. The girl everyone believed would never come home. The call to Clearwater nearly stopped Laura's heart. A detective's voice said, "We believe we've located your daughter." Laura couldn't breathe. Michael grabbed the kitchen counter with both hands just to stay upright. They had lived with false hope for so long that hope itself had started to feel dangerous. Hours later, inside a secure room at Tampa International Airport, 2 parents walked in and froze. Alicia stood near the window. Thin. Quiet. Unsure how to face them after all this time. The bruises along her forearms had faded, but the marks around her wrists never fully disappeared. Laura reached her first, and broke. Michael followed, pulling the three of them together in one trembling embrace. 17 years of grief, fear, and unanswered questions collapsed into that single moment. Alicia rested her head on her mother's shoulder and whispered, "I tried to come back. I didn't know if you were still looking." They were. They always were. But someone else had been counting on them to stop. Before the search teams. Before the press conferences. Before the flyers and the endless, aching years that followed, Clearwater was just a sun-soaked Florida town moving at its usual pace. Gardenia Lane looked like any other neighborhood. Cracked driveways. Trimmed hedges. Porch lights that stayed on just a little too long during summer nights. In June of 2007, Alicia Warren was 17 years old and absolutely full of plans. She wanted to study early childhood education. She talked about lesson plans, reading corners, and the kind of teacher she hoped to become someday. Her notebooks sat stacked on her dresser, filled with ideas, sketches, and doodles. None of it looked like the work of a girl planning to disappear. Inside the Warren home, mornings started early. Laura left for her nursing shift at Morton Regional while the sky was still dark. Michael headed toward St. Petersburg for delivery routes not long after. They were tired most days, but they always made time for their daughter, even if it was just a quick bowl of cereal at the counter or a hug before heading out. That June, the Florida heat sat heavy on every block. Palm leaves barely moved. The air was thick before sunrise and stayed that way until late evening. Kids rode bikes down sidewalks. Neighbors watered lawns with cold hoses. Dogs barked at passing cars. It was a summer like any other. Alicia rode her bike everywhere. She loved the freedom. She'd cut through the side streets near Myrtle Avenue to get to her job at Harbor Point Ice Cream. The ride took 10 minutes. She'd worked there long enough to know every sticky tile, every freezer hum, every regular customer. A few days before she vanished, a neighbor mentioned a white van slowing down near Gardenia Lane more than once. No plate number. No clear description. Just a van rolling past at odd hours. Laura told Alicia to be careful. Alicia nodded the way teenagers do when they think adults are overreacting. At the ice cream shop, things were normal. Alicia wiped down tables, restocked the flavor bins, and laughed with her coworker Kyle Benton, a chatty 19-year-old who made long shifts easier. No one at work had problems with her. No drama. No threats. Nothing that pointed to danger. Looking back, the hours before June 14th held no loud warnings. No obvious red flags. Just a quiet town settling into another warm evening, unaware that someone's plan was already in motion. Alicia walked out the door that night believing tomorrow would look exactly the same. It didn't. Harbor Point Ice Cream sat on Myrtle Avenue, faded paint, a little bell above the door, and air conditioning that could never decide on a temperature. On June 14, 2007, Alicia showed up for her evening shift just before 6, locked her bike behind the building like she always did, and tied her apron on. The night felt routine. Kids pressed their faces against the glass case. Teens shared soft serve outside. Families wandered in after dinner. It was the kind of summer shift that blurs into the next without leaving much of a mark. Kyle Benton worked alongside her. He was chatty, quick with jokes, and always trying to make her laugh, even when she didn't ask. Alicia rolled her eyes at him constantly, but she laughed too. Their dynamic was predictable. Unpredictable felt safe. The only thing slightly off was a man who lingered in the corner booth a little too long. He ordered a small vanilla cup and barely touched it. His eyes followed Alicia every time she walked past. She didn't notice. Kyle did. He mentioned it under his breath, but Alicia brushed it off. She'd dealt with weirder customers before. Around 9:30, the shop slowed down. Kyle wiped the counters while Alicia refilled the napkin holders. They talked about her senior year, her favorite teacher, the classes she wanted to take. Small talk. Easy conversation. The kind of moment that feels completely safe because you assume you know how the night ends. A few minutes before close, Alicia finished wiping the front display. She checked her phone and texted her mom might stay a little late to help clean. Laura replied, "Okay. Be safe." That was the last message she ever received from her daughter. By 10:45, the final customer had walked out. Kyle locked the front doors. Alicia grabbed her backpack, tossed her apron in the bin, and headed toward the rear exit. The security camera above the freezer captured her turning to wave goodbye to Kyle. It caught her bike beside her, her bag slipping off one shoulder. At 10:52 p.m., Alicia pushed open the back door and stepped into the warm, quiet night. The parking lot behind the shop was dim, lit by a single street lamp, half covered by a crooked shade. To her right sat the dumpsters. Ahead was the alley that connected to the side road she always used to ride home. She pushed her bike forward and disappeared from the camera's view. Kyle stayed behind to finish mopping. At 11:04 p.m., while alone in the shop, he made a phone call. 28 seconds long. The number he dialed had been deactivated for years by the time investigators tried tracing it. He never told police about that call. He claimed he forgot it happened. Less than 2 minutes after that call, a white Chevy Astro van rolled past a traffic camera on South Fort Harrison Avenue heading north, headlights off. The van kept moving. Alicia didn't. By morning, her bike would be found standing upright behind a dumpster. Untouched. Clean. Waiting for a rider who was never coming back. The next morning started like any other on Myrtle Avenue. Delivery trucks rolled past storefronts. Coffee shops unlocked their doors. People stepped into the day with no idea what was waiting 3 blocks from Harbor Point ice cream. A maintenance worker from a nearby apartment complex walked out around 6:40 a.m. to take out the trash. He froze when he saw the bike. Not tipped over. Not thrown aside. Standing upright. Balanced perfectly on its kickstand, like someone planned to come right back for it. He recognized it from the small blue charm tied to the handlebar. He'd seen Alicia ride by nearly every evening. But something about the scene didn't feel right. What teenager leaves their bike behind a dumpster before sunrise? Police arrived within minutes. The scene was calm. Too calm. No skid marks. No scuffing. No scattered belongings. Alicia's bag wasn't there. Her phone wasn't there. The pavement around the bike was smooth and clean. Even the chain was polished, like it had never touched dirt. All right, pause for just a second. If you're still watching, I already know you're locked in. You're not just here for entertainment, you care about what happened to Alicia. And that tells me exactly who you are. So let me ask you something. If this video suddenly disappeared tomorrow, if YouTube decided this story wasn't worth showing to new viewers, would anyone even know it existed? Here's the truth. The algorithm doesn't push videos that don't get engagement. That means if you're watching in silence right now, you're technically on the same side as the people who wanted this case to stay buried. I know that's not you. So hit that like button right now. Smash it. Let the algorithm know this story matters. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come on. We're building something here, a community of people who refuse to let the forgotten stay forgotten. Every subscriber gets us closer to 1,000, and every new member means more reach, more stories, and more cases that finally get the attention they deserve. You in? Then subscribe and let's keep moving. Detective Alvarez arrived on scene shortly after. He was the kind of investigator who paid attention to the details everyone else missed. He circled the bike twice, then crouched down and brushed his thumb across the kickstand. It hadn't slipped. It had been set. A fall would leave a mark, he said quietly. Someone put this here. Laura and Michael arrived not long after. A neighbor had called them before the police even got a chance. Laura ran toward the officers before anyone could stop her. When she saw the bike, she let out a sound no parent should ever hear themselves make. Michael reached for her, but he was trembling too hard to steady either of them. This means she's close, right? Laura asked through tears. She wouldn't just leave it here. Alvarez didn't answer. He wanted to offer comfort, but the silence of the scene troubled him. Crime scenes usually talk. Broken grass, dropped items, footprints. Anything. This place stayed quiet. Like someone had deliberately removed the noise. A small piece of fabric was found a few feet away, caught on the edge of a brick. Investigators bagged it. At the time, they weren't sure if it meant anything. Later, that item would be misfiled. Placed in the wrong tray during a shift change. Nearly forgotten. But on that morning, they treated everything as potential evidence. Officers canvassed every apartment in the complex. Some residents were home. Others had already left for work. No one saw a girl on a bike. No one heard a struggle. No one heard a car speeding away. Nothing explained why the bike stood there alone. Back at the Warren home, shock melted into fear. Alicia never missed a shift. She always texted. She always came home. Laura sat on her daughter's bed, clutching Alicia's favorite hoodie. Michael paced from room to room, replaying every moment from the last few weeks, trying to find something, anything, that felt out of place. Detective Alvarez returned that afternoon. He asked gentle questions. Had Alicia seemed upset? Had she talked about new friends? Did she ever mention wanting space? Laura shook her head again and again. She was excited about next year. She wasn't planning anything except school. Alvarez wrote everything down. When he left, he paused at the doorway and looked back at the two parents sitting on the couch. He'd worked enough cases to know what missing meant after the first 48 hours. He'd watched cases fall apart before anyone even understood what was happening. But the bike still bothered him more than anything else. If Alicia had been grabbed by force, it should have been knocked over. Someone took the time to stand it back up. A small, deliberate choice. And it raised 1,000 questions that still had no answers. The search began within hours. Volunteers showed up in droves. K-9 units were deployed. Patrol cars lined Myrtle Avenue. Yellow tape went up around the alley. Reporters arrived before noon, asking questions no one could answer. Alicia had been missing for less than 24 hours, but Clearwater moved with the urgency of something far older. Detective Alvarez divided teams across the surrounding blocks. Some searched drainage ditches. Others followed the bike route Alicia took every evening. Neighbors stepped outside with flashlights and bottled water, asking how they could help. Everyone wanted to believe she was just lost somewhere. Maybe confused. Maybe hurt. But deep down, the town feared something worse. Teams covered Sand Key Park, the Pinellas Trail, and the shoreline. They found dropped keys, trash, old beer cans, everything except the girl they were looking for. By nightfall, the hopeful energy of the first day had hardened into quiet dread. At the station, Alvarez reviewed every angle of the alley. One note kept catching his eye: bike placement appears intentional. That detail wouldn't leave him alone. It suggested time. Calm. Control. Not panic. Not chance. Interviews produced nothing solid. The man from the corner booth was questioned. He said he'd just stopped in for dessert. His alibi checked out. The neighbor who reported the white van couldn't remember anything more than a van rolling by at odd hours. Kyle Benton said he left work shortly after Alicia and went straight home. His mother confirmed he walked in before midnight. Still, Alvarez wrote Kyle's name twice in his notebook. Not because of what Kyle said, but because of how he said it. Nervous. Rushed. Like he wanted the conversation to end. Then the first major failure hit. On day 3, the fabric sample found near the dumpster was logged, but during a shift change, it was placed in the wrong evidence tray. It would take months before anyone realized the mistake. And years before investigators understood how much that item could have helped. A request for soil testing around the bike was denied. Too many open cases. Limited lab space. Alvarez pushed back, but he didn't have the authority to override budget decisions. By the end of the second week, the search slowed. Volunteers thinned out. Reporters moved on to other stories. The urgency around Clearwater faded. The Warren stayed active, handing out flyers, stopping strangers in parking lots, calling hospitals and shelters. But officially, the case fell into the same limbo too many missing teens fall into. Uncertain. Thin. Drifting toward cold. Detective Alvarez made one final note before the case was downgraded: person likely taken by someone familiar with the area. Preserve all items for future review. He hoped that one day, someone would have better tools. Better luck. Better timing. Because nothing he had was enough. 17 years is long enough for a town to forget a name. But it's nowhere near long enough for a parent to forget a daughter. By late 2007, the flyers were sun-bleached. The hotline calls had stopped. The case file had slid deeper into the cabinet. But inside the Warren home, nothing faded. Nothing aged out. Laura and Michael moved through every year like June 14th was still right behind them, close enough to reach back and touch. The first year carried a strange, heavy pressure. Every morning, Laura checked the front porch before work, hoping for a letter, a note, anything. Every night, she left the hallway light on in case Alicia came home half asleep, needing comfort. She kept Alicia's room exactly the same. The blue sheets. The photo strips pinned to the wall. The bracelets scattered across the dresser. She dusted the bookshelf every Sunday, even though the room stayed untouched. Michael handled the outside world. He printed new flyers every few months. He stood on street corners near Myrtle Avenue, handing them to passing drivers. He chased down every tip, no matter how thin. Someone swore they saw a girl who looked like Alicia at a bus stop in Tampa. Michael drove out at midnight and waited for hours. She never showed. Another person claimed to have spotted a teen matching Alicia's description at a mall in Lakeland. Michael spent the whole day scanning crowds. Nothing. As years passed, patterns formed. Birthdays. Candlelight vigils at Sand Key Park. Quiet prayers whispered into the wind. Laura placed a candle in the sand every year and watched the tide creep closer, afraid the water might wash the light away before sunrise. Clearwater moved on. Gently, but clearly. Schools changed. Shops closed. Myrtle Avenue businesses repainted their signs. New families moved onto Gardenia Lane, unaware that a 17-year-old once rode her bike down that exact street every night. When people mentioned Alicia's name, they did it softly, like speaking too loud might stir up old pain. Detective Alvarez retired in 2014. He lived quietly in Largo, still carrying the weight of the case he couldn't solve. He kept a box in his closet with old notes, even though he no longer had access to the official evidence. Sometimes he'd read through them again, searching for the one detail he feared he missed. By 2018, the case sat frozen. Not officially closed, but stuck. A file with too few leads, too little evidence, and far too much time. The Warrens learned to live around the space Alicia left behind. They told themselves hope was still allowed, even when hope felt thin enough to tear. But hope can't stop the slow, quiet changes time brings. Michael's steps grew heavier. Laura's hair grayed earlier than it should have. Nights became harder. Sleep came in short, broken patches. Dreams woke them, vivid dreams where Alicia was alive, waving from the end of the sidewalk, calling out that she'd been trying to find her way home. In those dreams, Laura always reached for her. She always woke before she touched her. By 2024, the case had gone completely silent. No new tips. No sightings. Even the old theories sounded hollow after so many years. Some believed a stranger took her. Others believed she ran. A few quietly suggested she might never be found at all, though no one dared say it around the Warrens. But silence has a way of fooling people. It makes you think a story is finished when it's only been waiting. Because on an ordinary morning in February 2024, a detective named Brooke Halston pulled a dusty file from the shelf. She didn't yet know how deep the rabbit hole went. She didn't know how many buried lies were about to surface. All she saw was a 17-year-old girl who vanished into the dark. And one quiet question that haunted her from the first page: why did no one ever find that bike a second time? When Detective Brooke Halston walked into the Pinellas County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit, she wasn't expecting any one file to stand out. Dozens of folders lined a metal shelf marked 2000 to 2010. Wrinkled edges. Fading ink. Labels written by hands long since retired. They all looked the same. But something about Alicia Warren's file made her stop. Maybe it was the missing photo clipped inside. Maybe it was the line in the report that said no signs of struggle. Or maybe it was the strange calm in the crime scene description, a scene that felt too clean, too tidy, for a teenage girl who vanished without a sound. Halston carried the file back to her desk. She read the first page twice. One line kept pulling at her: bike placed gently, kickstand down. That detail didn't sit right. Abductions don't look gentle. She built a fresh timeline, starting from the moment Alicia clocked out of Harbor Point Ice Cream at 10:52 p.m. She watched the old security footage frame by frame. Alicia pushed her bike. Waved goodbye. Walked out of view. 10 minutes later, a traffic camera near a gas station caught a white Chevy Astro van rolling north on South Fort Harrison Avenue, headlights off. The image was too blurry to read the plate. But it was enough to spark a new question: was someone waiting for Alicia that night? Halston pulled the old interview transcripts. She scanned names she didn't recognize until she landed on one she did. Kyle Benton, Alicia's co-worker. Back in 2007, Kyle was 19 and clean. But in 2024, the system showed a few minor arrests. His recent behavior made him worth another conversation. She found him working at a car wash in Tampa. The first thing she noticed? He couldn't hold eye contact. He leaned on a pressure hose and wiped his palms on his jeans the whole time she asked him to walk through the night Alicia disappeared. His answers matched the 2007 report almost word for word, like he'd rehearsed them. But Halston had something the original investigators didn't: updated carrier logs and improved retrieval software. She requested Kyle's archived phone records. The digital pull took days, but when the results came in, one entry made her freeze. 11:04 p.m., outgoing call, 28 seconds. Pinged 1 mile from bike location. Dialed number registered to a deactivated prepaid line. Kyle never mentioned that call. Not once. Not in any interview. Halston dug deeper. The burner number was tied to a Walgreens in Dunedin. No name. No address. Just a cash purchase made 1 week before Alicia vanished. She pulled receipts from the store that same week. Most were normal: snacks, detergent, travel items. But a few from the hardware aisle stood out. Rope. Cleaning fluids. Wood panels. None of those purchases were made by Kyle. The card belonged to Daniel Benton, Kyle's father. Daniel had passed away in 2016. No criminal record. No known connection to Alicia. His death removed him from suspicion, but the link raised a new question: if Daniel wasn't the one using that card, who was? Halston returned to Kyle with the burner phone data. The moment she mentioned his father's name, his shoulders tightened. His explanation stumbled out in broken pieces. He said his dad had a friend named Ray, an older guy, quiet, who came around to borrow tools, money, and sometimes the old Astro van parked on the side of the house. Ray showed up often enough to be familiar, but never long enough for neighbors to notice. Kyle claimed he didn't even know the burner phone existed. Halston noted every detail. The tremor in Kyle's voice. The way he said the name Ray like it tasted wrong. The strange mix of dread and relief on his face when she stood up to leave. Back at the station, she ran the name through every database she could access. Licensing records. State filings. Property tax rolls. Anything that might place a man named Ray near the Benton home in 2007. She found nothing. No full name. No address. No job history. No digital footprint. Either this man lived completely off the grid, or he didn't exist at all. Just as Halston started building a theory around the van, her desk phone rang. A cold case investigator from North Carolina was on the line. He described a young woman who had walked into a health clinic with a worn Social Security card and a story that didn't add up. No ID. No school records. No medical history. The clinic flagged it. DNA was collected. The results were ready. The investigator paused before speaking the name. The sample matched a missing teen from Clearwater. Alicia Warren. Halston sat completely still. 17 years after a bike leaned untouched beside a dumpster, the girl it belonged to was alive. But the relief came with new weight. If Alicia survived, someone kept her that way. And that meant the quiet questions from 2007 weren't buried. They were waiting. The flight to Asheville felt unreal. Detective Halston watched the clouds roll beneath the plane and tried to prepare for a meeting she never believed she'd see. A missing girl found alive after 17 years wasn't just rare, it was almost unheard of. She kept replaying the North Carolina investigator's voice in her mind. Calm. Certain. Almost stunned. When she landed, a county deputy escorted her to a small administrative room at the clinic where Alicia had first appeared. The walls were thin. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A paper cup of water sat untouched on the table. Then the door opened. A young woman stepped in slowly, cautious, like someone entering a space she didn't trust. Her hair was long, uneven at the ends, as if cut in a hurry. Her eyes moved carefully across the room, scanning corners before settling on Halston. Her wrists carried faint bruises that told a story no one had heard yet. It was her. Alicia Warren, alive, grown, and carrying 17 silent years in her posture. Halston introduced herself gently. Alicia didn't speak at first. She kept rubbing the edge of the table with her thumb, a repetitive motion that seemed to steady her. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin and uncertain, like someone unaccustomed to conversation. She remembered biking toward the alley. She remembered a van pulling close. She remembered someone calling her name. She remembered a cloth covering her face. A sharp chemical smell. The rest came in broken pieces. She talked about houses she never learned the names of. Roads without signs. Trailers hidden at the ends of long driveways. A kitchen where she washed dishes in silence. A room with one window she wasn't allowed to open. A man she never addressed by name. A woman who whispered instructions but never made eye contact. Alicia called them him and her. That was all. When Halston asked why she never tried to run, Alicia lowered her head. She said she was told her parents stopped looking. She believed it. She was told her name was different now. She believed that too. Years blurred together. Rules replaced reality. Obedience replaced choice. As Alicia spoke, Halston felt the weight behind every word. These weren't fragments of imagination. They carried the texture of lived trauma, routine, controlled movement, and days that blended together because nothing ever changed. After the interview, Alicia was transported back to Florida under protective supervision. At Tampa International Airport, her parents stood behind a security cordon. Laura pressed a hand to her mouth the moment Alicia came into view. Michael didn't move at first, his knees locked. When Alicia reached them, Laura broke. She pulled her daughter into her arms as tears fell against Alicia's shoulder. Michael wrapped around them both, hands trembling. The reunion lasted minutes before anyone spoke. But relief didn't stay long. Alicia flinched at sudden sounds. She asked for the door to remain open during intake. She didn't understand basic digital tasks, things most adults take for granted. She asked if she needed to check in before leaving a room. She asked if she was allowed to eat without asking permission. These weren't habits. They were scars. Detectives visited her daily. Some questions Alicia could answer. Others made her freeze. But one detail came through clearly. She remembered a highway sign with the word Montgomery. She remembered a grocery store called Price Better. She remembered a red truck with a dent on the right bumper. Halston fed those clues into the system. Then two threads connected. A property outside Montgomery had been owned by a man using only the name Ray between 2009 and 2011. No last name. Cash payments. When officers visited in 2012, the property appeared abandoned, trash scattered, a broken chair, a sink pipe left open as if mid-repair. One detail from Alicia suddenly mattered. she remembered the man had a curved scar at the base of his left thumb, caused by a cut he got while fixing a sink. When Halston shared this with her team, a quiet chill settled over the room. The burner phone. The van. The hardware store purchases. The abandoned property. The scar. The man wasn't a ghost. He was real. He moved state to state. And he was always one step ahead. But the real shock came from the DNA results on a hairbrush found in one of the cabins Alicia described. The sample didn't belong to Alicia. It matched a woman who vanished 9 years before Alicia did, a woman from Baton Rouge, last seen carrying a grocery bag to her car. Her name was Emily Clark. Her DNA sat on an object Alicia had used. The room went silent as Halston read the report. Emily didn't run away. She didn't disappear by chance. She was part of the same cycle. And that meant one thing: if the hairbrush was right, there could be more. Alicia wasn't the only one taken. She might not even be the last. All right, I need you to stop for just a second. If you're still watching, if you made it this far into Alicia's story, then you already understand something most people don't. These cases don't solve themselves. They get solved because someone refuses to look away. Someone refuses to scroll past. Someone chooses to care when it would have been easier not to. That's you. So let me ask you this directly. Are you going to stay silent, like the people who let this case sit in a drawer for 17 years? Or are you going to do something right now? Because here's the truth: the algorithm watches what you do. If you're sitting there without liking, without commenting, without subscribing, then this video gets pushed down, buried, forgotten. Just like Alicia almost was. I don't think that's what you want. So hit that like button. Drop a comment, tell me your theory. Tell me what you think happened. Tell me if you saw any of this coming. And if you're still not subscribed? Come on. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, and we only get there if watchers like you actually join the team. This isn't just about numbers. It's about making sure stories like Alicia's keep getting told. You in? Then subscribe and let's finish this. The DNA link to Emily Clark from Baton Rouge changed everything, but it still didn't give Detective Halston what she needed most: a name. A face. Something solid for the man Alicia called him. The pattern was growing clearer: Florida, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, but the figure connecting all of it stayed in the shadows. The break came from something so ordinary, it almost slipped past her. Halston requested every document tied to the Benton address from the mid-2000s onward. Permits, complaints, service calls, anything. Most of it was junk. Notices about trash pickup. Old power bills. A roofing estimate that never turned into a job. Then she opened a scanned invoice, handwritten on cheap carbon paper. Top corner, kitchen sink repair, Benton Residence, 2006. At the bottom, in uneven block letters, a short signature, Ray H. No full last name. No license number. No company listed. Just 2 letters hanging off the edge of the page, like the writer didn't want to be found. Halston stared at it for a long moment. A sink repair. A man named Ray. A connection to the Benton home 1 year before Alicia vanished. Combined with the hardware store records and the burner phone, this was the first physical trace of the person who had moved around the edges of every clue. She drove back to Tampa to speak with Kyle again. This time, she didn't start with Alicia. She started with the house. Who fixed things around the property? Who came by? Who did his dad trust? Kyle's answers were shorter now. He picked at the edge of a paper cup, staring at the table. When Halston slid the invoice across to him, his face drained of color. He knew the handwriting. He knew the name. He said his father's friend went by Ray, no last name, no questions asked. This man borrowed tools, money, and the Astro van whenever he wanted. He spent hours in the garage working on projects no one ever saw finished. He'd show up late at night sometimes, talking in low tones with Daniel Benton while Kyle listened from the top of the stairs. Then Kyle admitted something else. The night Alicia vanished, his father got a phone call after midnight. Through the thin hallway wall, Kyle heard him say, "You sure nobody saw you?" At the time, Kyle told himself it was about money. Or work. Something simple. Something safe. It was only now, sitting across from Halston with a missing girl alive and a second woman's DNA on a hairbrush, that he realized it might have been about something far darker. Halston pressed for details about Ray. Age. Height. Habits. Kyle remembered a man in his 40s back then. Quiet voice. Slow smile. Left-handed. Always wearing long sleeves, even in summer. Then he mentioned one thing that made Halston lean forward. During the 2006 sink repair, Ray sliced his hand open on a sharp pipe. The cut curved across the base of his left thumb. The scar left behind was raised and pale, like a half-moon. Alicia had described the same mark. The scar on him wasn't a fragment from a dream. It was real, sitting on the hand of a man who worked in Kyle's kitchen a year before Alicia disappeared. Back at the station, Halston cross-referenced every Ray H she could find with property ties in Georgia or Alabama. Most were dead ends. Wrong ages. Wrong states. Wrong timelines. But one name kept resurfacing in old records and tax rolls, filed under different variations of the same alias. Raymond Hale. Mailing addresses near Montgomery. A short stint near Baton Rouge. A cabin near Lake Burton, Georgia, listed in his name for 5 years, paid in cash, recorded under a loose variation of his initials. The same area where an old cabin fire report sat gathering dust. Genealogy results from DNA samples taken at one of the suspected cabins tightened the connection further. The unknown male profile matched a family line in northern Georgia. Several distant relatives shared a branch with a missing male who left home in the late 1990s and never returned under his given name. His last known alias on a rental record matched the Hale entries. Halston sat alone in her office with the file spread out in front of her. The path was no longer random. Clearwater. Baton Rouge. Montgomery. Lake Burton. North Carolina. A girl taken in Florida. A woman vanished in Louisiana. A scar on a left hand. A plumbing invoice signed Ray H. A cabin owned by a man who supposedly died in a fire but left no remains behind. The same shadow stretched across all of it. The man who drove the van. The man who called Alicia's name in the alley. The man who told her no one was looking anymore. For years, he'd been written off as a minor detail, a friend of the family, a handyman, just Ray. Now he had a full name. And if he'd faked his death once, there was no reason to believe he'd stopped running. Halston closed the file and reached for the Georgia fire report. If she wanted to catch him, that so-called accident in the woods was the next place to look. Because if the fire didn't kill him, it likely helped him disappear. Detective Halston drove north with a pit in her stomach. Every mile between Clearwater and the Georgia mountains felt heavier than the one before. The old fire report sat in the passenger seat, pages curled from age and humidity. On paper, the incident seemed minor, Unoccupied cabin, structural loss, no remains recovered. But minor reports don't follow victims across 5 states. Minor reports don't shadow 2 missing women. Minor reports don't line up with a man who changed his name every few years. When she reached the Lake Burton area, the air was cooler, but strangely still. Tall pines stood in rows around the old cabin site, their needles whispering in the wind. The foundation was nothing but scorched stone now. Charred wood lay scattered like broken ribs. 17 years of rain had washed away most of the ash, but the shape of the structure remained visible. A county fire investigator named Lowell met her at the site. He had worked the original case. Remembered the cabin. Remembered the night. Remembered the heat. And he remembered something else. When we got here, he said, kicking at a piece of burnt timber, the fire pattern didn't match an electrical start. But the place was empty. No one called about screams. No missing persons attached to the location. So we treated it like a simple collapse. Halston asked why no remains were found if the structure had come down that hard. Lowell paused. That's the part that always bothered me. Even in a bad burn, you find something, a tooth, a fragment, a piece of metal from a belt buckle. But we found nothing. Nothing meant one of 2 things: either the fire reached temperatures far beyond a standard cabin blaze, or the body was never there at all. Halston walked deeper into the ruins. A rusted hinge lay half buried in the dirt. Bits of melted glass stuck to the soil. Beside the old fireplace, she crouched and pressed her palm to the ground. Something metallic caught her eye. She dug with her fingers until she freed a small buckle, twisted, scorched, but intact enough to reveal its shape. It belonged to a restraint strap. Someone had used this cabin for more than storage. Back at the county archive, Halston requested the complete fire file. The clerk rolled out a dusty box the size of a showbox. Inside were photos taken the morning after the blaze. One showed a small area of disturbed earth behind the cabin. Investigators assumed animals caused it. It was never tested. Halston flagged the location on a map and returned to the site with ground-penetrating radar. The machine hummed across the soil. At first, nothing. Just roots and rocks. Then the screen flickered. A rectangular pattern appeared. Shallow, but clear. Someone had dug there. A trench long enough for a body. Or 2. Her breath caught. If the cabin fire was staged, it wasn't about hiding a death. It was about hiding movement. A distraction. While authorities focused on the flames, someone had time to leave, with whoever was inside. Halston called her team. They marked the area and began a slow excavation. Soil fell away layer by layer. On the second day, they uncovered fabric, faded, brittle, but recognizable as clothing fibers. On the third day, they found something more telling. A shard of a plastic hair clip. The kind sold in packs at southern grocery stores during the mid-2000s. The same kind Alicia described wearing during the early years of her captivity. Halston felt the weight settle. Alicia had been here. This wasn't just a waypoint. It was a home base. A place where someone moved people across state lines. A place where someone stayed long enough to leave pieces behind. The final blow came with a forensic summary. Mixed into the soil samples were trace proteins associated with prolonged confinement, skin cells, hair, and fibers from bedding. Enough to confirm that human activity continued inside the cabin long after the fire was reported. Someone had lived here during, or after, the flames. That meant the man did not die. He watched the cabin burn, walked into the woods, and kept moving. Halston closed the file slowly. Every piece of this puzzle confirmed the same truth: Raymond Hale was alive in 2007. He was alive in 2011. And he was likely still alive now. She leaned against the cabin's charred remains and looked toward the tree line. The silence felt heavy, not because of what she heard, but because of what she didn't. If he stayed off the grid for 2 decades, he knew how to hide. If he crossed states without leaving traces, he knew how to blend. If he kept these women alive long enough to build routines, his world ran on patience. And if Alicia had escaped the cycle, he would know someone was coming. Halston exhaled slowly. There was no turning back now. She had the scar, the alias, the cabin, the trail. Now came the hunt. Detective Halston returned to Clearwater carrying the fire report, the excavation results, and a sinking truth: Raymond Hale didn't vanish. He shifted. He watched. He planned. He moved like someone who understood exactly how long it took for the law to catch up. But something else had been gnawing at her since Asheville: Alicia's journals. Since coming home, Alicia had been writing daily. Some entries were scattered memories. Others were sketches of rooms she'd lived in. One page caught Halston's attention. A simple drawing, a cabin window with trees pressed close. Beneath it, a phrase written 3 times: "He listens at the edge." Halston studied the sketch. The trees had no space between them. No path. No clearing. They were drawn in tight clusters with long, narrow trunks, more like the wooded stretches in northern North Carolina, near where Alicia was found. She pulled property records from a 20-mile radius of the clinic. Then widened the search. Cabins. Trailers. Unregistered structures, anything with deep woods behind it. Most belonged to families or retirees. Nothing matched the pattern. Until she noticed a line item buried under a company name that didn't fit the area: Hale Timber Solutions. Listed as inactive. Registered 18 years ago. Removed from tax rolls for non-payment. The address wasn't a house, it was an unmarked lot deep in the woods outside Black Mountain, North Carolina. Halston stared at the name. Hale. Too close to be coincidence. She drove there with local deputies. The road leading into the lot was narrow, unpaved, and swallowed by overgrowth. The trees pressed close, exactly like the drawing. Deputies parked half a mile back and approached on foot to avoid noise. The forest floor muffled every step. The air smelled of damp leaves and old soil. Then Halston saw it. A small wooden structure, camouflaged by the trees. Hidden in plain sight. The deputy circled the perimeter. No smoke. No sound. No fresh footprints. But the locks were new. The padlock wasn't rusted. Someone had been here recently. Halston raised her hand. We breach. The door splintered with a single hit. Inside, the room was bare except for a cot. A propane stove. Stacked canned goods. A heavy winter coat. A plastic bin filled with old maps. And a radio scanner, tuned to county police frequencies. But the thing that made Halston freeze wasn't the radio. It was the wall. Pinned across it were printed flyers: missing women from across the South. Some cases were recent. Others dated back decades. All of them had small notes written in careful handwriting: too loud, moved often, listens, obeys, left early, found late. Alicia's flyer was on the wall, too. The date she escaped was circled. Beneath it, a single sentence: she remembers more than she should. Halston's chest tightened. This wasn't a hideout. It was a base of observation. A place he returned to when he needed quiet. When he needed to think. Deputies found tracks leading deeper into the woods. Long stride. Narrow impression. Fresh enough to follow. They moved fast. Weapons drawn. Radios low. Half a mile in, the trail split at a creek bed. Left, prints leading uphill. Right, prints heading into a narrow gully. Halston crouched to study the soil. The print on the right showed a deeper impression. More weight. Something being carried. Alicia's words echoed. He listens at the edge. Edges were quiet places. Narrow. Tight. Hidden. She took the right trail. 15 minutes into the gully, branches snapped ahead. Deputies raised their rifles. Shadows shifted between the trees. A figure slipped through the brush, tall, slow-moving, wearing a long coat despite the warm day. He turned once. Just long enough for Halston to see the curved scar at the base of his left thumb. Raymond Hale. Sheriff's office. Halston shouted. "Stop where you are." He didn't run. He didn't raise his hands. He just watched her with a calm, steady expression that made her skin crawl. Then he spoke, quiet, controlled, almost polite. "I thought she'd stay gone longer." Halston stepped closer. "You're done running." Hale tilted his head slightly. Running is only running if someone's close behind. Deputies closed in. Hale glanced toward the tree line, not as an escape route, but as if checking that no one else was watching. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not wide. Not friendly. A slow smile. The kind that comes from someone who believes he knows something no one else does. "I kept them safe," he said. "Until they forgot." Halston didn't respond. She signaled the deputies. They moved in, restrained him, and walked him out of the gully. Hale didn't resist. He muttered fragments about rules, about silence, about the others who stayed longer. None of it was clear. But one thing chilled Halston more than anything he said. He never asked about Alicia. Not once. Back at the cabin, deputies found a final piece of evidence taped beneath the cot. A list of road names. Back roads. Rural paths. Routes that didn't show up on GPS. Some had check marks. Some had question marks. Some were blank. The last line read, "New one. South route." Halston stared at the words for a long moment. If Hale had a plan beyond Alicia, it didn't end here. He was in custody, but his roots weren't. His notes weren't. His patterns weren't. His history wasn't. Alicia came home. But the trail didn't close. Not even close. And that's where we are. Raymond Hale is in custody. Alicia Warren is finally home after 17 years. But the flyers on that wall? The list of back roads? The blank lines that haven't been filled in yet? This story isn't over. And honestly, neither is this channel. We started this journey because we believe forgotten cases deserve to be remembered. We believe the people who vanished without headlines still deserve a voice. And every single video we make is one more step toward keeping that mission alive. But here's the truth, we can't do it alone. Right now, we're pushing toward 1,000 subscribers. That's the number that tells YouTube this channel matters. That's the number that unlocks new tools, more reach, and more chances to tell stories exactly like Alicia's. So if you watched this far, if you care about what happened to her, then I need you to do 4 things before you go. 1. Hit that like button. It takes half a second and it tells the algorithm this video deserves to be seen. 2. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what part of this story hit hardest. Tell me if you think there are more victims out there, because I want to hear your theories. 3. Share this video. Text it to someone. Post it to your story. Send it to that friend who loves true crime. The more people who see it, the more pressure stays on cases like this one. And 4. If you haven't already, subscribe. Join the team. Be one of the people who kept searching instead of one of the people who looked away. Because Alicia was told no one was coming. Let's make sure no one ever has to believe that again. I'll see you in the next one.